Chapter 23. The next evening, I waited until it was just Devin and I in the house. Raphael had gone outside to check on some things. I knew it wouldn't be easy, so I had deliberately waited until after the party and shifting the visitors to bring it up. He had enough on his mind without my adding to it. I have something I want to ask. I looked down at my hands. And you're not going to like it. What? He sounded unconcerned. I need to talk to Brandon. I glanced at him. Devin was frowning but didn't seem too unhappy. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, but I need to do it. I bit my upper lip. I need to talk to him alone. Yeah, that's not going to happen. There it was. The tone that said I'd never change his mind. Alone wasn't entirely what I meant anyway. Well, not alone, but without you there. I looked back down at my hands, then across the room, anywhere but at him. He was quiet a moment. From the link between us, I knew it wasn't just that he was trying to control his temper. I'd hurt his feelings too. It's not that I don't trust you or that I want to say something behind your back. I picked up his hand and wove my fingers between his. But I need to be able to see him, to talk to him, without you hovering or intimidating him. I paused. I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. I squeezed his hand, hoping he would understand. I don't like it. He kept his voice low. I knew you wouldn't, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He wasn't happy I wanted to talk to Brandon, and even less so when I said I didn't want him there. It took some fast talking, but he finally agreed though, not without some stipulations. You can see him as long as he stays in his cell. I blinked and looked at him a moment, not certain if he was serious. Because that's going to make him comfortable enough to talk to me. I said, once I realized he wasn't kidding. I don't care how comfortable he is, I care about your safety. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I'm not saying I want to be alone with him, just that I don't want you there. I didn't say I was afraid Brandon would be too afraid of another beating to say anything to me if Devin was there. I didn't want to have to. We went back and forth for more than an hour, but in the end Devin caved. He insisted I have 2 enforcers in the room. I could deal with that, I would have agreed to more, I just didn't want it to be Devin. It took me a while to convince him that it wasn't that I don't trust him, but I wanted him to be free to say whatever I felt like he needed to say, without hurting him in the process. At the same time, I didn't want anything Brandon did or said to hurt him either. I knew whichever enforcers Devin chose would keep Brandon from hurting me, should he even try, but they wouldn't keep him from talking. Devin, on the other hand, might get pissed by something Brandon said and shut him up. I didn't want that. It didn't take long for Devin to set it up, and by the next afternoon I was waiting in his office, not 100 yards from my back door, waiting. The small space heater ran full blast, trying to keep up with the whistling wind and light snow that had just started falling, adding to the inch that already dusted the ground. I still wore my coat while the heater was making progress. It was a slow, hard battle. I made a mental note to pick Dev up another heater for out here. I didn't like thinking about him working out here, with the heat taking this long to make the place even halfway comfortable. Impatient, I paced the length of the small room, moving past the end of the desk and the chairs in front of it with each pass. I didn't have to wait long. While it may have seemed like forever, I knew in reality it was less than 5 minutes before the door opened, and Gavin came in. I'd been expecting him since he'd been just outside, waiting for Brandon and the enforcer bringing him. Behind Gavin was Brandon. He shuffled slowly as if each step was painful, his head hanging and shoulders hunched in an attempt to conserve warmth. He wasn't wearing a coat or jacket of any kind, just a long-sleeved denim shirt. Gabriel came in behind him and closed the door. I guess the rest of Brandon's escort was waiting outside the room, probably in whatever vehicle they'd brought him in. I knew Nickie was somewhere nearby too. Brr. Gabriel shuddered. Temperatures dropping fast out there. I pinned him with a glare. And you didn't even give him a jacket. I motioned to where Brandon sat huddled in one of the chairs in front of Devin's desk. Is he always treated like an abused animal? I didn't bother trying to keep the anger from my voice. Looking back toward Brandon, I saw his head lift, surprised that I would stand up for him, clear on his face. I flinched. He looked even worse than the last time I'd seen him. Fresh cuts, scabbed over but still fresh, and dark bruises marred his once familiar face. No. It's not normally like this, but we weren't told until the last minute to bring him over here. I didn't have time to hunt down a coat. His cell isn't luxurious, but it's mostly comfortable. We don't keep warm gear in the room, so it's a little more difficult should he decide to escape. Is it heated? I didn't bother looking at Gabriel as I demanded an answer. Yes. The answer was instant, making me believe it. Have you even been there? You're with Bill every day. I've been there several times. He kept his voice calm, even. He seemed unperturbed by my attack, making me realize how odd I was acting. I didn't think Gabriel would lie to me. I'd gone out with him a couple times before I'd started seeing Devin, and while it hadn't been a romantic relationship, I thought we'd become friends. I stopped in a corner, my back to the room, and took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I forced myself to relax. As much as I didn't want to do this, I knew Alexis had been right. It would do no good if I was too angry or too tense to see it through. I took another deep breath and let it out slow. All right, I'll let it go. But I want you to consider this. He came to us, he surrendered. Do you really think he wants to escape? I turned and pinned a hostile look on Gabriel, waiting for an answer. It's not my decision, ma'am. I'm just following orders. I frowned. Since when do you call me ma'am, Gabriel? Since you mated our Theron and now outrank me. My glare turned venomous. I don't suggest you do it again, at least not in my earshot. Yes, ma'am. This time his voice was playful, and I knew he was trying to get a rise out of me. I flipped him off and moved to the chair behind Devin's desk, effectively turning my back on him. The chair was close enough that Brandon and I could talk easily, but far enough away that I wasn't in arm's reach. Do you know why you're here? I asked my old friend. Brandon shook his head, responding without actually speaking to me. You're here because I asked to talk to you. He glanced up, disbelief clear on his face. Ask them if you don't believe me. I nodded at Gavin, who stood on Brandon's side of the desk. I need some answers, and I can only get them from you. Brandon looked at Gavin. She's telling the truth. If it were up to the Theron, you'd still be in your cage. Gavin said. Brandon looked back at me, silent. I took another deep breath and this time let it out in a rush. I'm not sure where to start. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to put my thoughts together. Why did you want to see me? Brandon asked, speaking for the first time. I didn't. Alexis told me to. She said I need to confront you in order to move on. I trust her, so here I am, but sitting here looking at you, all I feel is anger. So much anger it blocks out everything else, even my pain. My fingers curled around the arms of the chair until they turned white. I think about my best friend in the world, who became the person I feared most. You had me kidnapped. I was losing control of my temper, and my voice was rising. I killed a man because of you. I broke both my arms escaping your henchmen. I shook both arms so he could see them, though there were no visible marks from the injuries, then fell quiet and watched, waiting to see what he had to say for himself. He wouldn't meet my eye, but the unhappy, dispirited look he wore said he didn't like being reminded of what he'd done. You were so focused on what you wanted. Did it ever occur to you to wonder what I wanted? I didn't wait for an answer. It certainly wasn't to be stalked and kidnapped. Then there's Annie. Your friends, the ones you enlisted to help you and me, killed her. They beat her to death and dumped her broken body where I worked. How does it make you feel to know you are the cause of her death? I stood up and turned facing the back wall. I needed to not look at him, at least for a moment. I'm sorry. His voice was soft, low enough that I wouldn't have heard him if not for my enhanced senses. I took several deep breaths as I tried to rein in my temper. Sorry for what, Brandon? I asked without turning around. For making my life hell? For terrifying me? For stealing my best friend and leaving me alone? For making me kill? I spun around, no longer able to contain my rage. For getting found out and banished? Or is it that you feel guilty about Annie? I was screaming now, unable to stop myself. He looked up, finally looking me in the eye. For all of that and more. There were tears streaming down his face. It was at that moment I realized I was crying too. The revelation only made me madder. I know you did it all, but I can't wrap my mind around it. How can the person who always had my back, who defended me always, have done these things? I don't understand. Collapsing back into the desk chair, I watched him, waiting for him to say something. The bruises on his face were hard to look at. It was difficult reconciling my mixed feelings. Something deep inside me rejoiced that he was hurting. While it wasn't the same hurt he dealt me, it was something. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel sorry for the friend he had once been. I watched him for several minutes, waiting. Don't you have anything to say? I'm sorry I hurt you. He looked down, then up again, but not at me. He focused on the window on the wall beside the desk. I glanced in that direction and noticed the snow was really coming down fast, but I didn't care. At the time, it never occurred to me that I was hurting you, only that you were mine, and I needed to make you see it. I know now it was never true, but somehow it was twisted up in my mind. He was quiet for another moment. I don't know, things changed when I realized that you weren't drawn to me the way I was drawn to you, but when the revelation came, I was able to see it wasn't that Devin was keeping you from me. He wasn't holding you against your will. You were with him because that's what you'd chosen, he's who you wanted. It hurt, but I could accept it. I started distancing myself from the others. When I found out about Annie, not that she was dead, but that my friends had done it, I packed my things and left. I couldn't be with people who would do that. I couldn't let the ones who'd done it go unpunished. So you came back to make sure her murderers got punished? I didn't believe him. That couldn't be his only reason for coming back. That was part of it. See, I wasn't wrong. What was the rest? I wanted to apologize to you and the pack. To see if I could earn forgiveness and maybe come home. You want to be welcomed back to the pack? I don't know if it's possible, but I'd like to try. Why? I tilted my head to one side and watched him. He looked at the floor again. You're not the only one I hurt, Nick. He looked up and met my gaze. My father won't speak to me or let Mom. He says I'm an embarrassment, and he won't risk their position in the pack by associating with me. I've lost everything. Everything. His voice broke. I can't believe how stupid I've been. I don't know if it's possible, but if it is, I don't care what it takes, I'll prove myself worthy of being allowed back. I watched him, trying to figure out how sincere he was. Was it the truth, or was he feeding me another line of bullshit? After the way he'd turned on me, become a different person almost overnight all those months ago, I didn't trust my instincts when it came to him, not anymore. A small part of me wanted to hug him and say, it was going to be okay. A bigger part of me wanted to slap him, to double up my fist and hit him over and over. I didn't listen to either part. I'm glad that's not my decision. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I knew I should, if only for my own peace of mind, but right now I was just too angry. While I might someday forgive everything he'd done to me, I knew there was no way we'd ever be friends again, not like we once were. I looked at him for several minutes without saying anything, trying to sort out my feelings. Sure, the anger was there, but under it, way under, was a little bit of pity. If he'd felt toward me, even a fraction of the draw I'd felt for Devon, I could begin to understand the desperation that losing it might have made him feel. Not that it justified his actions, not at all. Still, did I want it to cost him his family? I'd never before considered how his parents might feel at losing him. Have you seen your folks at all since you came back? I asked. Brandon looked at the floor. Mom comes to see me every Monday when Dad's at work, and she can sneak in a visit. She spends an hour or so with me, telling me what's going on with the family and all her friends. And your dad? He shook his head, still focusing on the floor. You haven't seen him? He refuses to see me. Insists I've shamed the whole family. I knew that had to hurt. Brandon and his father had once been close. For him to refuse to see him at all would be hard for Brandon. I'm sorry to hear that. That's part of why I want to earn my way back into the pack. I know I can never undo the hurt I've caused. All I can do is try to make amends. To earn a second chance and try never to screw up so bad again. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, buying myself a little time to form my response. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Brandon. I killed a man because of you. I can forgive a lot. But that you forced me into a position where I believed I had to kill or be killed, I can't ever go back from that. He nodded, letting me know he understood. On the other hand, I can't see punishing you for the rest of your life, and I'll tell Bill that. Thank you. I don't want your thanks. I want to be able to sleep at night without nightmares. Right now, knowing you're here and locked up is making that hard. I can't say what Bill will do, but at least my conscience will be clear. Nickie, I'm sorry. I waved one hand in a sideways chopping motion, stopping him. I don't want to hear it again, Brandon. Words are cheap. Too easily said than forgotten. You want my forgiveness, you're gonna have to earn it. How? I'll do anything you want. He sounded desperate. I don't know. I felt tears pooling in my eyes. It won't be as simple as completing an assignment. You have to prove to me you deserve another chance. I took another deep breath. Even then, things will never be the same. They can't be. I'm not the same person I was then. I have a mate, I've lost a child. I will never again be the person you used to know. He nodded, looking back at the floor. Part of that's my doing, I know. I sat back in the chair and just looked at him. It was the first time I'd looked past the bruises and really seen him. He didn't look good. His usually full face looked drawn, almost gaunt, and his hair had grown shaggy. Almost as bad was the several days of beard growth. It was thin and patchy. That was one of the few normal things. The couple times he'd attempted to go without shaving when we were teens had looked just like this, but he'd never let it get so long. What would you do if Bill let you come back? I asked. Will you be able to get back on at the mine? He shrugged. I don't know. I'm sure I can find something. Think about it, I'm sure he'll ask. Other things too, like where you plan to live, especially if your dad's not talking to you. Yeah, I'll have to figure it out. He scrubbed his hands over his face. But it all depends on if he'll let me stay. What's the point in worrying about it if he doesn't? I looked at him a moment longer. I don't know. I didn't. I didn't know how I felt. Right now I was just done. Turning, I looked at Gabriel. You want to take him out first, or can I go in the house? You finished already? He asked, brows lifted. Using one hand, I rubbed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Yeah, I'm done. Then we'll take him back to his cell. Just where is his cell? I looked back up at him, curious. The Aniquito's basement. I froze, staring at him for a moment. I didn't know he had a basement. They're really rare around here. Which is why it makes the perfect place. Gabriel met my gaze and kept it. The entrance is hidden. Unless you know what to look for, you'll never find it. I assume that means he's being fed regularly? I glanced at Brandon before looking back to Gabriel. He eats when the Anikitos does. We're not starving him. I held my hands up in front of me, splayed in defense. I'm not saying you are, but look at him. I tilted my head in Brandon's direction but didn't turn my head. He's lost weight and not just a little bit. It wasn't just that it was Brandon. I would have been concerned if the same were happening to anyone. Well, almost anyone. I had no problems holding him captive, but he needed to be treated at least humanely. The only exception I might make would be Garza and Anderson. But then, I didn't think holding them captive would be what happened to them, at least not for very long. It's not their fault, Nickie, Brandon said. They're feeding me plenty, but sometimes I just can't eat. He sat with slumped shoulders, his head hanging. They're treating me fine. I promise. Neither of us mentioned the bruises and regular beatings. We didn't have to, and nothing would change them even if we did. I turned back to Gabriel, looking for some kind of confirmation. He nodded once and pushed away from where he'd been leaning against the wall. Come on, Stone. Time to go home. I watched as Gabriel and Gavin escorted him out, then sat for several minutes before shutting everything off and heading for the house. Inside, I took off my coat and headed for the coffee pot. It wasn't the kick of caffeine I was after right now, but the warmth. I added a liberal amount of chocolate syrup from the bottle sitting next to the sugar bowl, then added the dark brew to the cup. Wrapping my hands around the mug, I lifted the steaming mixture for a sip. Did you get what you needed? Devin asked from the doorway. His voice startled me and I jerked. My coffee sloshed but managed to remain in the cup and looked up with wide eyes. I don't know, but I had to try. He ran one hand through his loose hair, then looked back at me. I know you don't like it. I didn't like it much myself. I looked into my cup, not sure how to fix this. I knew he was unhappy I'd insisted on doing this, but I'd had to. I heard the soft shuffle of his bare feet as he moved toward me. I'm sorry. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. I'm sorry too, baby. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings by not wanting you there, but I was afraid he would be intimidated. You're probably right. His cheek rested against the back of my head. Now what? Now I try to move on. Dwelling on him and all that he's done won't do me or you any good. I set my mug on the counter and turned in his arms. Have you thought about us trying again? Trying again? His brow furrowed. Getting pregnant again. I bit my bottom lip and held my breath. His eyes went wide and he froze, staring at me. I hadn't thought about it. He blinked several times. Why not? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Well, you haven't been doing so well. I gave him a half smile. I know, but I'm feeling better now. Are you sure it's not too soon? His eyes searched my face. Are you sure you're ready? I don't mean we start right away, but, I hesitated, I've been thinking about it. And I don't think it's entirely a bad idea. I mean, I know we didn't plan it before, but who says we can't now? But Tracy said the other day that you should wait at least 3 months. His thumb rubbed up and down my back in idle movements. He's used to humans. Alexis gave me the green light to try again a few weeks ago. That's what started me thinking about it. You didn't tell me. He leaned his head forward and rested his forehead against mine. I wasn't hiding it. My voice dropped. I just wasn't ready to share yet. He kissed my forehead. And now you've given it to me to think about. He narrowed his eyes and pressed his lips together. Don't rush it. We don't need to decide today or tomorrow or even next week. But think about it. All right, baby. He watched me for a moment. How about we kick back on the couch in front of the fire and watch a film? Devin blinked, taking a second to process the change of subject. Sounds good to me. You want to pick the film or should I? You pick, I'll make the popcorn and cocoa. I frowned. What about dinner? What do you want? The back door opened and Gavin came inside, shaking off the snow that had settled on his hair and shoulders. It's really coming down out there. Hey, I turned toward him. We're gonna go watch a film. Want to join us? He glanced at me, then took off his jacket and hung it up. What you planning to watch? I shrugged. We hadn't gotten that far. I was gonna make popcorn and cocoa while Dev picks the film. Gavin looked back and forth from me to Devin for several seconds. What are your dinner plans? I just asked Devin what he wants. I turned to look at Dev. I don't care as long as there's plenty of it. I rolled my eyes. I don't know. Maybe I'll put together a pan of macaroni and cheese later. Gavin glanced at the clock over the stove. You realize it's almost 5 now, don't you? I blinked, surprised. No, I didn't know it was that late. How about you two go start the film? I'll get the mac and cheese in the oven, then join you. Gavin offered. You don't have to wait on us. I protested, feeling guilty. I know I don't. But I need to unwind a little after the last hour. Cooking will let me do that. He waved his hands in the air, shooing us from the room. Go on, get out of here. I'll pick something and get it started. Why don't you go put on something more comfortable? Devin gave me a small shove toward the bedroom and stepped through the archway into the living room.